Welcome to the Nobody Guide to Life, where we provide tips and tools for personal growth, personal development in your spiritual journey that you can use right now in your everyday life. I'm J.A. Plosker. You can always find out more at thenobodyguidetolife.com. Thank you so much for joining us. So we often look to our healthcare providers to, well, do just that, provide healthcare. But what if that care was mixed with something else? A little life guidance, a little extra dose of patience, a little more attention to how healthcare decisions and our lives intersect. Well, my guest today believes she's found the right prescription for change. Dr. Penelope Hsu was an actor who made the switch to medicine because, as she said, she wanted to make her family proud. But soon into her residency, she realized she was miserable. Ignoring her passion for acting finally caught up to her, and she struggled with depression and confusion. And like many of us, she just felt stuck in a rut. She tried medication, therapy, church, journaling, but nothing helped. So she sought out a life coach out of desperation, and her life changed. She became a believer in the power of coaching and started applying the techniques in her practice. The result? She found new ways to express her creativity and to blend her passions. She changed, her practice changed, and patients have benefited as well. It sounds like quite a journey, and it can help transform not only those who practice medicine, but also what we can expect as patients. Welcome to the show, Penelope.
Thank you so much. That was a lovely intro.
Oh, well, it's all your background. You know, we've interviewed coaches on this show before, and you come to it from such a different place. Talk to us a little bit about that journey from physician to coach and what happened in there.
Yeah, it is an interesting journey. I don't know. I mean, basically what had happened was I hit a wall. I got really burnt out, which is a very common thing that docs go through and a lot of people go through, wherein, you know, nothing felt right. So I was working, supposedly helping people, but I wasn't really feeling like I was making much of a difference at all. And as far as like my mood, you know, I just felt kind of numb. I was physically tired, like everything just kind of felt dead and definitely wrong. Like something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And as you mentioned, you know, I tried so many things. You know, I thought maybe I was depressed. You know, I went on medication. I went gluten-free. I mean, I just, you name it, I tried it. And nothing was really making a difference. And it was just, you know, I don't believe in coincidences anymore, but I met a woman who was a therapist and also a life coach. And, you know, she was giving a speech at a conference that I was at. And it was, you know, one of these very inspiring speeches. And I ran up to her afterwards and I was like, I must work with you. I don't know what it is that you're doing, but I love it. You know, it's the most live I felt in like 2 years. And so she took me on as a client. And I clearly remember saying to her, you know, when she explained like she's a therapist and a coach and she also did some energy stuff, I was like, listen, I'm a doctor, you know. I don't believe it. New age woo-woo, you know, if it's not measurable and if I can't prescribe it or see it on an x-ray, I don't believe it because that's the way medical training is in this country. And she was very calm with me and she was like, listen, you've tried it your way, the science way for 2 years. You know, are you willing to try something else to get you past this wall? Right. And at that point I really was, you know, and so I trusted her and, she asked me questions that no one ever asked. She saw patterns that I had never even, you know, become aware of until working with her. And it literally was like a veil just kind of lifting from my eyes where I could finally see clearly who I wanted to be, the path that I wanted to create for myself. Even if it didn't look like your typical doctor's path, it made total sense to me. Right. And it was like the most inspired I'd felt in years.
So this was nothing. Well, this was nothing you'd ever been open to before. This was that was a totally new experience for you.
Yep.
Wow.
And throughout all of my training, you know, we had heard about there's a branch of medicine called complementary or alternative medicine.
Right.
Right. Which, includes things like, acupuncture and herbs. And now now there's a new field called integrative medicine that kind of integrates nutrition and sleep hygiene, but they're all considered separate
Right.
from traditional Western medicine. They're all considered adjunct. They're all considered, well, if everything else fails, then maybe consider these things. And that's just the training that I received. And so that's what I grew up believing. And it really wasn't until I hit my own wall. And, quite honestly, Western medicine just failed me. I went on antidepressants. I tried an exercise regimen. That I then started to look for, again, quote unquote, alternative therapies. And I remember the more I learned about these coaching techniques, the more indignant I became as to why wasn't I taught this in medical school?
Yes.
This stuff helps people. This is life-changing stuff. This can motivate people to quit smoking, to lose weight, to just take ownership of their health and their life. And I know nothing about this.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to learn more and more and more. And ultimately, my coach just got really tired of me asking her questions all the time. And she was like, listen, stop picking my brain, go take a course, because clearly you want to do this. You know, this is going to be part of your practice.
Right.
And so I did, I did a lot of research on all the different coaching programs, and I had a few friends that had become coaches. And ultimately I decided to go to IPEC, which was in my opinion, it's the best coaching school in the world. It changed my life. And I just started using those tools with, the patients that I work with. I do a lot of teen health at a community health center in Chinatown here in New York. And I saw some really, really profound changes happen. And I just kind of knew this is the path for me going forward.
Well, before we get into that, because I know there's so much interesting, I've heard a few of the stories that have come out of what you've been doing, applying these tools, but take us back to how specifically did that coach help you work through? Because I know you said you were an actor and that it was hard for you to leave that behind. How did you work through some of those issues? What tools did you get from that coach that really opened your eyes over and over again?
Well, I think the first thing was challenging all of the programming, all of the messaging, people call it different things, that you just carry with you over the years that you just assume to be true.
Right.
Right. Especially being an Asian American child of immigrants. I'm the first generation of my family born here in the States. There is a tremendous story that you're told from the time you're born of you have to honor our family, you have to honor our sacrifice, your life must be better than ours, you must go to school and achieve more, be more, do more than we were able to. That's why we came here, for you. Right. And so our sacrifice will only be honored if you become a doctor. And anything less than that is like spitting in your parents' face, is completely trampling their sacrifice.
Right.
Anything other than that prescribed lane that they've set for you. And I believed it, I fully believed it. It made sense, right? They gave up everything. They came to a new country, they didn't speak the language, Of course I must honor them. Right. The problem is that, that was no longer working for me, right? I was miserable. Right. I was absolutely miserable. I was absolutely honoring them and they were thrilled, but I was literally dying inside. And so my coach really kind of pushed me to see that. She was like, how are you really honoring them if inside you're dying?
Right.
Right. And what would it look like for you to feel alive and honor them? And I think that was one of the fundamental things about coaching that I love so much, is this concept of and versus or.
Yes.
Yes. It doesn't have to be honor or you're a complete, piece of crap.
Right.
You can be artistic and a doctor, and wouldn't that be even more interesting? Right. Wouldn't that be even more special? And I had never thought of it that way. I had always thought of it as either or. This concept of and really, I think, changed my life. And I started just, planting that seed of, okay, what would that look like? And how could I do that? And what steps do I need to take? And so then it just kind of kind of gets you thinking and gets you doing towards this goal of really being the person that you want to be, not just what everybody else wants you to be.
How did that show up for you? How did that look for you as you started to live that and principle? What did that look like in your life and in reality, in real time?
I think the first thing was, after my residency, I had gone to LA for 6 years. And I'd pursued acting during the day, and I'd worked at the emergency room at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles at night. And that was sort of like the one time that I was able to have an and. Huh. And when I moved back from LA to New York, I kind of let it go. Right. And so by the time I had worked with my coach, it had been probably 4 years since I'd done anything creative. Wow. And what that first thing was I started taking improv classes. And I loved it. I mean, it was scary. It was super scary. Right. But I loved it. And from there, I met obviously wonderful artists. And then we started collaborating together and, doing skits together. And, it just sort of reopened that creative side that I'd always had, that I had actually, forged on my own several years prior, but I just let it go. And so that's kind of one thing that happened wherein I just sort of made this commitment to myself to be either taking a class or writing something or collaborating with someone on something creative. And maybe not telling my parents about it.
Your own personal and. I love that.
That's right. That's right.
It's such an important message because we get so caught up in whatever we're doing. Even if we're creative types, we can get so caught up in our writing that we believe that finishing this book is all we have and we can neglect other things. So it works the other way too. And I love that you bring this message of and, because we really can make the time if we make the commitment. And I like hearing how that worked for you in real time. I think that's very valuable advice. Yeah.
I mean, it certainly wasn't easy, but the other thing that my coach definitely stressed was, go for the low-lying fruit first, right?
I love that.
Right? Don't try to audition for a Broadway play, right? Take one acting class.
Right. Right.
8 weeks, 2 hours a week, and I think that was also an important thing because, now as a coach, I kind of see the thinking is one is you need it to be achievable, right? So that you get your win, so that builds confidence, so that you can go for something bigger, and then you get your win, and then, and you go from there. If you have this wonderful inspirational moment of yes, I'm going to be an actor again, and then, you just run out to auditions and you don't get them, there's a high likelihood that you'll just give up again.
Right. Absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
But there's no way I wasn't going to get into an acting class, right? Obviously they'll take your money.
That's right. And so many people, frustrated writers or whatever, they find that time. The kids go to bed and they spend that half hour writing. That's the low fruit for them. Is I have this half hour in bed, I'm going to use it writing. That is such a valuable piece of advice for people. Is you don't write the next great American novel. Just get a chapter down, get a few pages out. I love that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how do you see these tools helping your clients, your patients? How do you bring that into your life as a doctor?
Yeah. So, the lowest lying fruit for me in the clinical world is my teenage patients. Again, I'm a pediatrician, so most of my patients don't talk. But a lot of the parents, have a lot of, anxieties and things like that. And so, so with my teenage patients in particular, I love bringing coaching in. I love just sort of asking the question, again, what would you like to see for yourself?
Right.
Again, teenagers now, even if you're not, from my particular background, every family has programming that they pass on from generation to generation, right? And so just kind of bringing that topic up of, what is some of the messaging that you've been hearing that doesn't work for you? All of the conflict that all teenagers have with their parents, some of it's just teen angst, but some of it really is, the teen has a very different outlook of their life than what their parents have for them. And how do you bridge that gap? Yes. How do we communicate better? How can you do that respectfully? right? Again, where's the and? How do you get to be your own person and still be civil towards your parents and still be grateful for everything they've done for you, but forge your own path? And so I just kind of ask those types of questions, get them thinking. I will also ask the parents those types of questions, right? Will you be okay if your child doesn't become a doctor, but, becomes a hairstylist? Like, what is,
Right.
what is the difference? And really kind of asking those types of questions and just letting it sit there sometimes, and the room gets a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm okay with that. Because they are uncomfortable questions. It's challenging people's perceptions of themselves and of their child and of their parent. It is that kind of ripping off of the veil that sometimes, is a little bit uncomfortable. But providing a safe space for that, right? Providing a space and offering support for teens and their parents to kind of go through that, again, in a controlled sort of not shouting kind of way. So I ask a lot of questions along those lines of my teenagers. And then even for parents, just sort of gently nudging along the lines of like, where is this strong push for them to follow your footsteps coming from? Is it really just, I want them to have a healthy life, or is there more? Right. Were you pushed to go and just sort of asking those questions that, again, I don't know very many doctors do. But I do.
Well, you studied at the school that our former guest, Luke Iorio, is the president of IPEC. And so, he has a very, and of course it would stand to reason that you have a very similar outlook on the power of these tools to go beyond sometimes just being a helpful ear. It sounds like you're really helping people do is build structure. So you're having discussions that many people could have, but I loved what you said. You're doing it in a controlled way. You're creating a structure for people, a safe place to have these kinds of conversations that they may not get in other places or from other physicians.
Right. And then, the next step from there is I'll actually, create like a plan.
Yes.
Like, okay, so if you really want to be a hairstylist, what do you need to do to convince your parents that that's the right choice?
Oh, I love that.
Is it looking up some schools? Is it, trying to get a job so you can pay for some of it? Is it, what do you need to do again to bridge that gap? And again, starting with low-lying fruit, and with teenagers, they're obviously they're not full adults. Their brains aren't fully developed. And so you sometimes have to kind of help with that planning, which, is fine. With my adult clients, the idea is that the client themselves will kind of create their own plan. But for teenagers, you kind of have to sort of nudge them a little bit here and there. But to actually give them steps that they can follow and follow up and see, did that work? Did that not work? Did the parents throw out that list? What's because that can happen sometimes. And then just kind of partnering with them little by little, step by step through that process. It is not just about like touchy-feely, let's talk about it and leave inspired, but it gets down to the nitty-gritty of step 1 is this, step 2 is this, step 2A is this,
Yes, and it sounds a lot like if somebody goes to their physician with high cholesterol or some other issue, there's a plan, there's testing, there's follow-up, there's how do you, and I love that you bring those socio-emotional tools into your practice and use those because I think they're extremely powerful. I mean, I know you created a whole program that you called Prescription for Change. What does that program do then how does it take it to the next level then?
Well, so for Prescription for Change originally was designed for the medical community.
Right.
Because again, there's this dearth of knowledge about any of these skills.
Right.
And there's a bit of a disdain towards them. So my delusion of grandeur is to bridge that gap, is to show, medical administrators, physicians, training doctors, meaning medical students and residents, what these tools are, why they're important, the effects that they can have, and again, how do you implement them into your own practice? Wow. So it's like a 4-part course. One is for like administrators who have, again, very different responsibilities and different, metrics that they're using. And there's another part for practicing clinicians. Again, when you're in an office and you're seeing 30 patients a day, like how do you squeeze these types of questions in? How do you kind of come up with these plans in a 15-minute visit, which is not a lot of time, right? For medical students, it's sort of how do you hold on to the things that make you, even when you're working 100-hour weeks and you don't have time to take an acting class. What can you do to kind of keep that creative spark? If you love adventure, what adventures can you have, given that you're on a shoestring budget and you're working all of the time? There are still ways, right? And it is sort of nudging people to become a little bit more creative, think outside of the box, and figure out how to create that and situation.
Yeah.
So that's what Prescription for Change originally was. The work that I've done has taken me to, medical organizations. It's taken me to, women's groups. It's taken me to nonprofit organizations. So the fun thing about coaching is that, the tools themselves work in any environment. They work in any landscape. And so the work that I do tends to be twofold. One is if I'm working with an individual client, particularly, I do a lot of inner work. Again, looking at that messaging, looking at the obstacles, looking at how past failures have sort of built up a wall that you then think, okay, that's just an impenetrable wall. I failed every single time at that. There's no way I'm ever going to accomplish that, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other side of it is, again, those very practical tools, stress management tools, breathing, journaling, all these types of things to kind of keep yourself grounded and keep yourself connected to yourself. And then the third part is always the planning, the actual strategic planning part.
Right. Because I watched some of your videos and it's very interesting and it's very engaging. And I'm wondering, how has that been received now in the medical community? How are people responding to you as a professional, knowing that you're adding this to your professional profile?
Yeah, well, I'm very happy to say that the feedback that I've gotten is overwhelmingly positive.
Good.
And it's one of those things where I remember talking to my fellow pediatricians at the community health center, just, giving them some really, really introductory concepts about coaching, and every single one of them, and they're all like really, really smart, and they've all been practicing for a long time. They had the same response that I did initially, which was like, what are you talking about? And why haven't we ever done this before?
Right.
And we could totally use some of that here. We could use some stress management. We could use some clarity. We could use some, breathing techniques. And why don't we, how come in all of these years that we've been practicing, we have no idea about any of this stuff? And so yeah, overwhelmingly, it's been positive. I think nowadays physician burnout is becoming a very, very well recognized phenomenon, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Here in New York, we lost a medical student and a resident at NYU. They both committed suicide within like 3 or 4 months of each other.
Wow.
Yeah. Mount Sinai, I think was it last year or 2 years ago, they lost a medical student, a resident, and an attending who's someone who's finished all of their training. They're out in the world, and she literally just walked out of the 30th floor of a building.
Oh.
And so these things are hitting the news. There is now a push from the ACGME, which is the graduate medical education governing body for all residency programs in the country, that every residency must now have a wellness program, because they're starting to see that we're literally dropping like flies.
Right.
Physicians have the highest rate of substance abuse. We have the highest rate of suicide completion out of any of the other professional, professions. And so there is an awareness now that's building. And so I think people are more and more receptive to it now. But overwhelmingly, people are interested in learning about it. And then afterwards, they're like, man, why didn't we learn about this sooner?
Right.
And so I think that's a good sign. There are a few, old timers, so to speak, who are just very ingrained in what they do. And they're okay with what they do. They're not burned out, which is also fine, right? If what you're doing works for you, then don't change a thing.
Right.
But if you're starting to feel, like you're hitting a wall, you're starting to feel stuck, you're starting to feel dead, then by all means, do something about it. Do something different. Why not? Right?
Well, and I think there's this danger in these professions where I think people coming up through the ranks feel like they're being held, and probably are being held to a standard that is someone else's standard. And there's this tremendous fear of I'm not doing enough or I'm letting down my mentors. And I think that clamps down a lot of discussions of the need for self-care and the need for people to reach out. That's why I think what you bring is so important, because I've grown up with doctors and I've had doctors, in training in my life, my whole life. And burnout is real, as you said. And you feel like you're always competing, always being held to the standard maybe of the old guard. So I think it's really great to hear that you're trying to bring these tools front and center where they really, really need to be, in a profession they really, really need to be in.
Yeah. It is difficult. And you're right. The old guard it's been established for so many centuries. You know what I mean? It's a really tough culture to change. And it is a big ship to turn, but I think it's worth it. I think it's worth a shot to try. I think it is absolutely our responsibility to protect the younger docs from killing themselves from the level of stress that they're under, right? I mean, I can't sit and do nothing about that. And there are a few of us out there, physicians / coaches. I've met like maybe 3 or 4. And we're all trying to work in this space in our own ways. But there is a small, tiny movement that is starting to percolate. And I think it starts with the individual. I think when you can make an impact on one individual doc, then they tell their boss and they tell their boss, and eventually, ideally, it sort of starts to trickle out. Yes. And hopefully even the old guard will see some value in not being so burnt out.
Well, right. And then, you don't have to give yourself over to a life calling to the point where, you just want to hang up. It is possible to go into the law, to go into medicine, to go into social work, to go into the clergy. It is possible to do that and still have an and. I love that theme. I love that. And so Penelope, all of this experience as a physician, all of this experience as a coach, what's a tip or tool that you can give us that can help us on our journeys of personal and spiritual growth?
I think one of the things that helped me the most was journaling. Yeah. And not like with a purpose. I did this book called The Artist's Way. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I have heard of that, yes.
By Julie Cameron. She's a writer and she used to teach, creative writing, like screenwriting and things like that to students. And she came up with this program. So it's designed for creative type people. But her point is that everyone's creative, right? You're always creating something, whether it's you're creating a relationship or a work product or a family, whatever it is, we're all creative. And she has this thing that she calls morning pages, which I literally have just taken from her and I use all the time with clients. But the idea is to clear your mind. Like we were saying before, it's not about writing the next great American novel. It's not even about writing a chapter. It's about getting rid of all the gunk that stops you from even starting.
Right.
Right. And so the idea of just literally like a mind dump, ideally at the beginning of the day, and ideally handwritten. So it slows you down a little bit, and literally just dumping out whatever comes up. It's more like a free write than a journaling with a purpose. It's not like, okay, today I'd like to write that chapter and maybe the chapter will no. It's really like, man, I didn't sleep well last night. Those tacos didn't sit well with me. Like literally everything that's going on, just dump it out on the page so that it's done.
Right.
So that your plate is clear, your mind is clear, you've gotten it down on paper. If there is a to-do list, you've written it out on those pieces of paper. Got to get to the dry cleaner, because those are the things that will block you and get in the way of you sitting down to even write a page. Right. I got to go to the dry cleaner. My tummy doesn't feel good. Better go make some tea. Better call a doctor. All of these things just kind of pile up and you don't even realize it. Right. You don't realize that, I don't want to call it self-sabotage, but you don't realize how easily you can forget yourself.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. And it just becomes a list of errands, a list of things to keep you busy that literally distract from spending any time on yourself and figuring out what your and is going to look like.
Right.
And so I really recommend doing this sort of journaling, ideally at the beginning of the day, handwritten. anywhere from 1 to 3 pages, right? And just dumping everything out and starting your day fresh,
Right.
your to-do list done, you've journaled about your tummy ache, like da, 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 da. And it's amazing how when you're done journaling, your tummy won't hurt anymore.
Right.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. There are mornings where I'll be like, man, my back really hurts. I didn't sleep good. And then after 3 pages, I'm like, my back feels fine. Okay. And off you go. So it's a really great practice that I think brings a lot of clarity, and it paves the way for the creativity. It paves the way for the inspiration. It clears out all of the obstacles that are getting in the way of it.
Thank you for that, because I think sometimes we think of journaling as this isolated tool where we pick, like, what's the meaning of the universe, and we start to write. But it doesn't have to be that way. It can be a gateway to even greater creativity. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. Low-lying fruit.
Yes.
Fruit, right? Just clear the gunk out first.
I love it. And that brings us to the end of this episode of The Nobody Guide to Life. Thank you, Dr. Penelope Hsu, for being on the show. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Well, fantastic advice. And I want to remind our listeners, the prescription for change is whatever suits you best. Lots of people have lots of answers, lots of diagnoses and prescriptions for us when we feel stuck. But in the end, we don't need another person's medicine. We have to accept the cure for what ails us as individuals searching for wellness and peace on a road meant just for us. You can find out more about Penelope and her practice at guidingclarity.com. The link will be in our show notes at thenobodyguidetolife.com. And you can always check out more episodes at thenobodyguidetolife.com. Reach out to us on Twitter and Facebook at Nobody's View, or join the Facebook community Simple Spirituality. If you liked what you heard on this episode, please consider sharing it with someone you know. Keep practicing and have a good week.